we don't really know the exact footprint that MAFIA is going to have, we're trying to do a bit of speculation. So we've got Crypto Kool-Aid, who is game dev, knows everything about games, and he really has, he can see a few steps ahead of where we are concerning the game possibilities of this, the game possibilities, and he's basically teaching us right now.
Well, it just makes logical sense, right? And like I've stipulated, I don't know necessarily where things are going to go, but I know what I would do if I was on the other end of the rope. And I usually am on the other end of the rope doing this silly nonsense for 20-hour days. But it's not an easy lifestyle to do it. But you do have a particular competitive advantage of understanding why games work, right? And why the underlying decisions will be made to push the protocol first for the global good of all. And that's where I find it very fascinating to look at how all these things dovetail into a greater expansion on many different things, right? Jacob has alluded that it's going to be a multi-year game and multi-year facet. And just as any day one patch, DLC, expansion pack, you think about those things in those exact type of components. Let's say you play Magic the Gathering. Well, I mean, shit, when I played, I had a full deck of Arabian Nights. I think I ended in Mirage or whatever. I was like 16 years old. But look at how far the game has expanded from that time. It's basically a glorified game of poker or any kind of deck of cards, a more advanced Go Fish. But how does that actually expand further and further and further as more components get brought online and more interoperability between components? I could see the same thing happening in between the Pulse side and the B&B side as well. Or it's scaling out into different form factors inclusively in and of itself. A Gearhead Studios production could happen on FanForge. So Archie's story could be an entire audio drama or an entire series over on that episode, right? There are ways that we can scale all of this without topping off the coffers. It just naturally evolves. And that's what's really fascinating about any type of real game situation, because it's all entertainment, and entertainment wants to be consumed, entertainment wants to grow, and entertainment wants to scale inherently of itself.
So on that evolution there, Kool-Aid, when getting into like a specific instance, right?
Sure.
One of the things that I've been thinking about recently was that we know that that bodyguards offer certain modifiers, right? Like the gym is, I think, economic. As Johnny, I think, is a connection one. And so we know that it's pretty intuitive that you have an offensive skill and how those bodyguards map to that skill, and same thing with defense, right?
Right.
And I think Jacob has talked about the kill skill being introduced, right? And right now, player worth is really the constituents of that influence that right now. There's just a handful, right? It's Staked Mafia, it's Liquid Mafia, and those have different. Staked Mafia is a little bit more valuable. The age of the player that influences player worth. There's a couple other factors in there, right?
Sure.
And
hierarchy too.
Yeah.
Right. So like, for example, you're the number one of the number one family. However, you're not the number one of the number one worth of your family.
Absolutely.
So that is a different vector of GIF being the number one worth of the number two family. And then you also have the businesses owned, subtle luxury goods like planes and all the rest of that come into that ranking system. But yes, there are different parameters that I could infer that I may not share on how particular high value targets could be eliminated. But I can answer at least speculation to help everyone grow as a community on how they think about this.
Yeah, going down that path, right? So knowing that player worth is established just on a handful of factors right now in early access. Mm-hmm. As we move forward into the game launch, one of the things that I'd been thinking about is that really, to me right now, player worth is almost a vanity. I mean, there might be some psychological aspects to that right now that could be meaningful. But as we move forward into the game, player worth is going to be influenced by other factors, right? Potentially kill skill, potentially an economic aspect, potentially a diplomatic aspect related back to connections, or however they frame that. Do you think that thinking is correct? And how else would you see that evolving over time?
Well, sure. I mean, like I called it on screen the other day when I was the 5 a.m. early stream where Colt was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed instead of the other way around. And I have not. If you look at the, do you want to bring up the market for anyone to see how nice this looks as like a decentralized DEX, and showing the floor and ceiling at different prices. I had not seen at that point a level 10 franc. Now, I do know a couple of them exist by people, but if you look at the market store, there's only been 2 actually sold, whereas there's been plenty of SAMs. And so, like, in that regard, so we may not even see them up there. So level 7 franc we've seen before, but
yeah, we've got a level 10 SAM.
Right. Go scroll down. Let's see.
No, there's no level 10 Johnnies.
Right. Well,
there's a level 8
Johnnies as well. That's
but
right.
There's a few level 8 Johnnies for sale.
That's right. So there's going to be new. My gut tells me that there is going to be a refactoring of items, just because of how the wiki has some items listed that are not in the game. Some items, if you look at the roulette board of what you get, such as shop items, the bottom or the worst top 3 are the ones that actually require bullets. And if a bullet is such a high token commodity and all the rest of that, why is it that the the lowest 3 items, or the easiest ones to get, are actually the ones that shoot bullets? It's interesting, right? And same thing as like a Molotov cocktail, right? You don't use a Molotov cocktail on crowds of people. Use a grenade. A Molotov cocktail is usually used for businesses. Throw it in a glass window because it already has the accelerant necessary for a low-profile start a fire situation that creates chaos. I do see like the different bodyguards being like a different rollout or a deck out of your character, right? If I'm going to do a heist, maybe I want a communications one or the economy one. But then my defenses are not up. It's also not including what happens in an HQ. It's also not including what happens if we consider like a tile, right? A tile or a hex tile in a game, it's 6-sided. What happens if like there are 5 gearheads and 1 syndicate person comes to try to assassinate someone? Mm-hmm. Is everyone going to get a roll? Right? Because remember, I was saying turns, actions, movements, and then in-game socket means what you can do with that, whether that's a business and or a decision. Could I script my helper to automatically, for example, protect my Dawn if I'm not there? And then my bodyguard would theoretically jump in front, because me as the number 2, theoretically, I would automatically jump in front of my Dawn to shield him, right? That's what you would assume your guy underneath you to do. So then would my bodyguard also do that? So that's where we're going to see the in-game movement mechanics also move into the cooldown mechanics at the same time, because we can see that a bodyguard requires 120 minutes to recharge 1 level of its point-based system. So if that's a level 10 SAM or an offensive guy, that would take 20 hours to reload that particular use case. Mm-hmm. Well, then what about the secondary market of bodyguard selling and selling pre-loaded, pre-rested items? And that's where I'm saying, like, it's not just the vault. There's a whole micro economy under the micro economy of the entire game, which also is disassociated from the token itself. It's pretty fascinating, to be honest.
Yeah, really. And I mean, you touched on a lot of stuff there, and that's an awful lot to unpack. But an additional thought, I mean, I think this has been talked about before, but I think we're going to see a stratification of certain items as well, right? Health, obviously, we know that as that rolls out, there are going to be blood types, and some of those blood types are going to be rarer than others. Right. So one thing to think about now would be, does it make sense to buy a 1 bundle of 1,000 health as opposed to 10 units or 10 100 units, right? Knowing that each one of those will have different blood types assigned to them, or thinking that way at least, right?
Yep,
That's one thing. Yeah. Same thing with
sure.
cars.
Yep.
Cars, again, they're going to have different conditions assigned to them, right? So just because you have a car that's, you know, a $500,000 car doesn't mean that it's equivalent to another $500,000 car.
That's exactly right. Think about it like DNA or fingerprints onto each aspect of the game that could be developed into its either own microecology and economy, or that could be combined together into a use case. Because until racing is live, what is the real purpose of a car except crushing down for bullets? That's a different economy that's substrate to a bullet factory, right? So if you don't have a bullet factory there, but you have a car crusher, then sending out your underlings to go heist a whole bunch of cars is a very feasible way to create bullets, which is its own token and its own economy that can be sold outside of the video game.